I asked the bank for $6,000 to fix my broken roof. The banker locked her door. Your wife controls $28 million. I stared at my wife. She had hidden it from me for 9 years. The next morning, she filed papers to declare me incompetent. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The storm came through Cedar Ridge on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning the whole street smelled like wet bark and turned soil. Hank Schrader stood in his driveway with a mug of coffee going cold in his hand. He was 41 years old, built thick through the shoulders from 20 years of climbing ladders and hauling gearboxes. He wore the same gray work jacket he had owned since before his daughter could walk. He was looking at his house. It was a 2-story place with cream siding and green shutters, the kind of house that got built in the 70s and never got remodeled. The driveway had a crack running down the middle of it like a dry riverbed. The mailbox leaned. The porch light had a bulb out. None of that was what held his attention. Up near the chimney, 3 shingles were gone. Not loose. Gone. The wind had peeled them back and taken them somewhere down the block. Hank set the mug on the hood of his truck and went inside for a flashlight. The attic door was in the hallway ceiling, and the folding ladder came down with a groan it had made for 9 years. He climbed. The air up there was hot and thick with the smell of dust and old insulation. Pink fiberglass sagged between the rafters. A wasp nest, long abandoned, hung in the corner like a gray paper fist. He swept the flashlight across the boards. Then he stopped. Near the chimney, the wood was dark. Not damp, dark. The stains spread out in a wide ring, the color of weak tea, and the edge of it had gone soft and fuzzy with mold. Hank pressed his thumb into the wood and felt it give. Water dripped once, somewhere behind him, and struck the insulation with a small, wet sound. He crouched there for a long moment. He had patched this roof twice himself. Once in his 3rd year in the house, once 4 years after that. Both times in August, both times alone, both times with a tub of roofing cement and a putty knife and the sun cooking the back of his neck until it peeled. He remembered lying on the slope with his cheek near the shingles, listening to Celeste call up from the yard to ask if he wanted lemonade. He remembered saying yes. He remembered thinking at the time that this was what a marriage was, 2 people fixing a house with whatever they had. Hank clicked off the flashlight and climbed down. He called Ritter Roofing at 9 that morning. A man came out at 11, walked the roof for 20 minutes, and came back down with his clipboard and a face that said everything before he opened his mouth. How bad, Hank said. It's not a patch job. I figured. The decking's rotted through in 3 spots. If you patch it, you're patching over wet wood. 6 months and you're right back here. Except now your ceiling comes down. Hank nodded slowly. Full tear off. Full tear off. New underlayment, new decking where it's soft, new shingles. I can do it in 3 days if the weather holds. He wrote the number on the estimate and turned the clipboard around. $6,200. Hank looked at it. He did not flinch. He had known it would be somewhere near that. He had spent his whole adult life around numbers like that, in the way that men who fix things always know the price of fixing things. When can you start? When you tell me to. Give me a couple days. The roofer nodded, tore off the top sheet, and handed it over. His truck pulled out and left 2 wet tracks on the pavement. Hank stood in the yard with the paper in his hand. He was not worried. That was the thing he would think about later, lying awake in a bed that had gone strange to him. On that Saturday morning, holding a $6,000 problem, he had not been worried at all, because he had a wife, and in 9 years, they had never once failed to solve something together. That evening he grilled chicken because it was cheap and because Brianna liked it. His daughter was 14 and had started wearing her hair in a way that made her look older than he was ready for. She ate fast and asked to be excused and went upstairs with her phone. Celeste came to the table late, the way she always did on bookkeeping days. She was 38. She kept her hair pulled back and wore her father's old watch on her left wrist, a heavy silver thing she never took off. She had a way of sitting down carefully, like she was always half listening for something in another room. Hank waited until she had eaten a few bites. Then he slid the estimate across the table. That came today. Celeste picked it up. She read it. He watched her eyes move down the page and stop. She set it down. We don't have that kind of money. Hank kept his voice even. We have savings. Not enough. We've got about 9 in the account. That's the account, Hank. That's not spare money. That's the account. So we take a small home repair loan. 6,000. 5 years, low interest. It's 120 a month. Celeste put down her fork. No. The word landed flat in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked twice and quit. Hank stared at her. We have a leaking roof. I said no. Celeste. He leaned forward, forearms on the table. I was in the attic this morning. The decking is soft. I put my thumb through it. That's not a leak. That's the roof coming apart. Then patch it again. There's nothing left to patch it to. You've always been good at that. He held her eyes. There was something in her face he could not name. Not stubbornness. Something tighter than that. Something almost like fear, held very still. Then what do you suggest? He asked. We wait. Wait for what? Just until spring. We'll be in better shape in spring. The ceiling in the upstairs hall is already stained. You've seen it. You put a towel down last month. I know what I put down. Then help me understand. Celeste stood up and carried her plate to the sink. She turned on the faucet and let it run over the dish longer than the dish needed. I don't want a loan on this house, she said. That's all. I don't want debt. It's 120 a month. It's still debt. Hank sat back. The chair creaked under him. He had heard versions of this before. He had heard it about the vacation to Michigan that never happened. He had heard it about the kitchen cabinets, which still had the original hinges, one of which had been broken since the year Brianna started middle school. He had heard it about the transmission on his truck, which he had rebuilt himself in the driveway over 2 weekends in February with his knuckles cracking open in the cold. Every time, the answer had been the same. Not now. We need to be careful. We'll figure it out. And every time, he had believed her. That was the part that would sit in him like a stone. He had believed her completely. All right, he said. Celeste turned around, surprised. All right, I'll figure something out. Her shoulders came down half an inch. She almost smiled. Thank you. Sure. He carried his plate to the sink and stood beside her while she washed. Their arms nearly touched. She smelled like the lavender soap she had used for as long as he had known her. And for one strange second he wanted to say something kind to her and could not think of a single true thing. That night the wind picked up again. Hank lay in the dark listening to it push against the house. Around 2 in the morning he heard water, 3 floors of quiet between him and the sound, and he did not get up. On Monday morning he took an early lunch and drove to the bank. He expected to borrow $6,000. Instead, he found out that his entire marriage had been built on a lie. Cedar Ridge Savings and Trust sat on the corner of 4th and Main in a squat brick building with a flag out front and a drive-through window on the side. Hank had banked there since he was 19. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and old paper. A woman named Pat had worked the teller line for as long as he could remember, and she waved at him with 2 fingers when he came through the door. He signed in for a loan officer and sat in a vinyl chair with a folder in his lap. Inside the folder were his last 2 pay stubs, his most recent tax return, a copy of the roofing estimate, and 3 photographs he had taken in the attic with his phone and printed at the drugstore. He had come prepared. He always came prepared. It was the one thing his father had taught him that had stuck. Mr. Schrader? The woman who came for him was in her 50s, silver-rimmed glasses, a cardigan the color of oatmeal. Her nameplate read Nadine Holloway, loan officer. Her office was small. There was a photograph of 2 grown sons on the desk and a coffee mug with a chip on the handle. So, she said, settling in, home repair. Roof. Storm took part of it Friday. Half the county's calling about roofs today. She smiled. How much are we talking? 6,000. The estimate's 6,200. I can cover the rest. She took the folder and worked through it while he sat with his hands on his knees. Her keyboard clicked. The monitor light moved across her glasses. Your credit is good, she said after a while. Very good, actually. Your income is stable. 12 years at the same employer. 14. She corrected something on the screen. This is not a difficult loan, Mr. Schrader. So we can do it. I don't see why not. Let me just pull the household side. She kept typing. Hank looked at the framed print on the wall, a watercolor of a covered bridge, the kind of picture nobody chooses and everybody hangs. The typing stopped. He did not notice at first. Then the silence went on long enough that he did. Nadine was not looking at him. She was looking at a second screen, angled away, and her expression had changed in a way he could not read. She scrolled. She stopped. She scrolled back up. Everything all right, Mr. Schrader? She took her glasses off, then put them back on, which struck him as a strange thing to do. I need to ask you something. Okay. And I want to be careful, because there are things I'm not permitted to discuss. Hank sat forward. Ask. Are you aware of your wife's family trust? The words did not mean anything at first. They went into him and found nothing to attach to. He frowned. Her what? Her family trust. No. Nadine's mouth moved slightly. She looked back at the screen. You've held a joint account here for, she checked, 9 years. That's right. And your wife has other relationships with this institution, which I can't detail for you. Okay. But she is listed as the beneficiary of a substantial trust. Hank held very still. Somewhere behind him a printer started up and ran a page. How substantial? He said. Nadine hesitated. It was a long hesitation. He watched a woman decide something. She lowered her voice. Approximately $28 million. The number went through the room and did not land anywhere. Hank stared at her. That can't be right. I thought there might be an error. Nadine turned back to the screen. She was not typing now. She was reading, slowly, checking something against something else. That was my first assumption. And she sat back. There isn't. Hank did not move. He was aware of small things. The chipped mug, the hum of the ceiling vent, the weight of his own wedding ring, which he had never once taken off, not even in the shop, which his supervisor had warned him about twice. My wife, he said carefully, has $28 million. That's not what I said. Nadine spoke gently, but she did not soften it. She has an interest in a family trust valued at approximately that amount. I can't give you private details about her accounts, her distributions, or the terms. Please understand. I've already said more than I should have. Hank understood. He was not being shown a balance. He was being told that something enormous existed. Something enormous, standing behind his wife for 9 years, and she had never mentioned it. Not once. Not when they ate box pasta 3 nights a week the first year because his hours got cut. Not when they drove to her cousin's wedding in Indiana with the air conditioning broken because a compressor was $400. Not when Brianna needed braces and he took the overnight shift for 11 months to cover it and came home smelling like solvent and slept until noon on Saturdays and missed 2 of her school concerts. Not when he lay on the roof in August with roofing cement drying on his hands. Mr. Schrader? He came back. Yeah. Do you still want to proceed with the application? Hank looked at the folder on her desk. His pay stubs, his tax return, his photographs of rotted wood, printed at a drugstore for 18 cents apiece. Something in his chest went quiet and cold and very organized. Yes, he said. Nadine blinked. You do. I want it in my name. Just mine. That's fine. That's actually simpler. And I want a copy of everything I sign. Of course. Everything, Miss Holloway. Every page. She looked at him a moment longer than she needed to. Then she nodded once, and there was something in it that might have been respect. I'll make you a full set. They did the paperwork. It took 35 minutes. He signed his name 11 times and initialed 9 boxes, and his hand was steady on every one of them. At the door he stopped. Ms. Holloway. Yes. Why did you tell me? She was quiet for a second. Because you brought photographs of your own attic to a $6,000 loan appointment, she said. And I've been doing this a long time. Hank nodded. He walked out into the parking lot. The sky had gone flat and white. He sat in his truck with the folder on the passenger seat and did not start the engine for 11 minutes. He did not cry. He did not hit the steering wheel. He thought about the attic, the softwood under his thumb, and he thought, I have been living in a house I did not know the shape of. He did not confront her that afternoon. He went back to work and finished his shift. He walked the floor, signed off on a bearing replacement in line 4, and talked a new hire through a lockout procedure twice because the kid was nervous. Nobody looking at him would have seen anything. Inside, he was doing what he always did with a broken machine. He was gathering the facts before he touched anything. He came home at 6. He ate dinner. Brianna talked about a group project and a girl named Priya who never did her share, and Hank listened and asked the right questions and felt like a man watching himself from across the room. Celeste was quiet. She had been quiet since Saturday. At 7:40, Brianna took her plate to the sink and went upstairs. Her door closed. Music came on, muffled through the floor. Hank stayed at the table. Celeste was at the sink, sleeves pushed up, washing the roasting pan. The water ran. Steam rose off the metal. Celeste, did your father leave you a trust? The water kept running. Then it did not. Hank washed her hands. That was where it showed. Her right hand went still on the pan, fingers spread, and stayed that way for 2 full seconds. Then it moved to the faucet and turned it off slowly, deliberately, like a person defusing something. She did not turn around. Who told you? His stomach tightened. Not from surprise. From confirmation, which is a different and worse thing. So it's true. Now she turned. Her face had gone pale under the kitchen light. Water ran off her hands and dripped on the floor, and she did not seem to notice. Hank, sit down. She sat. He did not raise his voice. He never had, not in 9 years, and he did not start that night. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at his wife. $28 million. Celeste closed her eyes. Is that number correct? It's her voice caught. She cleared it. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. And she did. It came out of her in pieces, disordered, the way a thing comes out when it has been held too long. Her father, Whitney Calloway, had died 7 years earlier. Hank had been at the funeral. He had carried the casket. He had stood in the rain in a suit that did not fit him and held an umbrella over Celeste's mother for 40 minutes. What Celeste had told him afterward was that the estate was complicated, that there were other family members, that most of it was tied up and going elsewhere and there was nothing for them. He had accepted that. He had never asked a second question. It had seemed indecent to ask so soon after. The truth was that Whitney Calloway had spent 30 years building a company that made industrial fasteners and had sold it. And before he died, he had put nearly everything into a trust. Celeste was a named beneficiary. She had a right to income. She could receive discretionary distributions under certain conditions at the trustee's judgment. She had been receiving them for 7 years. Hank listened to all of it without interrupting. When she stopped, the kitchen was very quiet. How much have you taken out? He asked. That's not. How much? Celeste looked at the table. It varies. Give me a year. Hank, give me 1 year. She said a number. It was more than he made in 3. Hank sat with that. Here is the thing he would try to explain later, to his attorney, to his daughter, to himself at 2 in the morning. He was not angry that she had money. He had never wanted to be rich. He had wanted a solid house and a good truck and enough left over to take his family somewhere once a year, and he had built a life that got him most of that with his own hands, and he had been satisfied with it. He was angry because for 9 years, she had looked him in the face and told him they could not afford things. We skipped Michigan, he said. Twice. You said we needed the cushion. I know. I patched that roof myself. Twice. In August. I had heat blisters on my arms. I know. When Brianna needed braces, I took overnights for 11 months. 11 months, Celeste. I missed her winter concert. She cried in the car, and I told her we'd make it up, and we never did. His voice did not rise, but something under it went hard. You watched me do that. Celeste started crying. Not loudly. Her mouth pulled sideways, and her chin shook, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes. I was afraid, she said. Of what? That you'd change. Hank looked at her for a long moment. Say that again. That you'd change. She was crying harder now. My father, he warned me. Before he got sick, he said money changes people, and it changes the people around them faster. I watched it happen to my cousin's husband. I watched him quit his job and start talking about investments, and by the 3rd year, he wasn't the same man. And I loved who you were. I loved that you fixed things. I loved that you were proud of the truck. I didn't want to lose that. So you tested me. No, for 9 years. He shook his head slowly. You watched me work overtime, and you sat there and you kept score, and every time I didn't complain, you thought, good, he's still the good one. That's not what it was. That is exactly what it was. Celeste put her hands over her face. Hank stood up. He walked to the counter and stopped, his back to her, looking at the window over the sink. Outside, it was full dark. He could see the kitchen reflected in the glass, and himself in it, and his wife behind him with her head down. You didn't protect the marriage, he said. Hank, he looked up, not at her, at the ceiling, at the hairline stain in the plaster near the hallway door, the one that had been growing since spring. You built a completely different marriage, he said, and you didn't tell me I was living in it. Behind him, Celeste made a sound. He did not turn around. Upstairs, the music was still playing, and their daughter, who knew none of it yet, sang 2 words of it out loud and laughed at herself. Hank stood there until the sound of it went through him. Then he went to the garage and stayed there until midnight, and when he came back in, he slept in the recliner in the den, and neither of them said anything about it in the morning. He gave it 6 days. 6 days of sleeping in the recliner and eating breakfast standing up and answering his wife in short, polite sentences. 6 days of Brianna watching them both over the rim of her cereal bowl with the particular dread of a kid who knows the weather is changing. On the 7th day, Hank came home early and asked Celeste to sit with him on the back steps. It was October. The air had a bite in it. Across the yard, the neighbor's chainsaw started and stopped and started again. I want a separation, he said. Celeste's hands closed around her coffee cup. You don't mean that. I do. Hank, we can fix this. People fix worse things than this. Maybe. He looked out at the yard. The grass needed one more cut before the cold came. But I don't know who I've been married to. And I can't sleep next to a person I have to guess at. So talk to me. Ask me anything. I'll tell you everything. All of it. The account numbers, the trustee's name. I don't want the account numbers. She stared at him. Then what do you want? A separation. And then a fair divorce? Clean. No lawyers throwing rocks. Celeste set the cup down on the step. Some of it slopped over. You want a divorce so you can take half. Hank turned his head and looked at her. It was the first time in 9 years he had looked at his wife and seen a stranger sitting there wearing her clothes. Say that again. I didn't mean, no. Say it again, so I'm sure I heard it. Celeste's mouth opened and closed. I don't want your father's money, Hank said. I never asked for it. I didn't know it existed until 8 days ago. I'll sign whatever you want that says I don't touch it. Bring me a paper today, and I'll sign it on this step. You say that now. And there it was. Hank stood up. That, he said, is exactly why this is over. He went inside. He heard her on the phone that night through the bedroom wall. He was not trying to listen. The house was old, and the ductwork carried sound between the rooms like a bad telephone, and he had known that for 9 years. It was her mother. Lorraine Calloway was 66 years old, and Hank had never once in 9 years felt her approve of him. She had come to the wedding in dark blue and cried in a way that seemed more like recovery than joy. She had a habit of calling their house the little place. She sent Brianna checks on her birthday, and Hank a card signed with only her first name. He could not hear the words that night. He could hear the shape of them, Celeste's voice going up and getting cut off. Long silences where the older woman talked. Celeste saying twice, "That isn't what he said." And then, near the end, Celeste's voice very small. "Okay. Okay." Hank lay in the dark and understood that something had just been decided about him by 2 people in another room. He learned the rest in pieces over weeks and then all at once in a document. Lorraine told her daughter that a man who says he does not want money has already decided how to get it. She said Hank had gotten comfortable. She said 9 years in a house he had not paid for by himself was a long time to get comfortable in. She said that if Celeste opened the door even an inch, a court would open it the rest of the way, and her father's life's work would come out of it in pieces. He doesn't have to say it, Lorraine told her. They never say it. Celeste hired a divorce attorney out of Columbus named Grant Vesey, who charged $600 an hour and had a reputation for going first and going hard. And then Celeste made the decision that ended everything. She sat in Vesey's office and told him that Hank had become increasingly irrational since discovering the trust. She used that word, irrational. She told him about Hank's anger. She described the night in the kitchen, Not the words he had said, but the way she had felt while he said them, which is not the same thing and does not belong in a legal file. She mentioned that he had gone behind her back to a bank, that he had applied for a loan she had specifically told him not to take, that he had done it in his own name, without telling her. She mentioned 3 arguments from the previous year. A fight about her mother at Thanksgiving, a fight about the truck, a night in June when Hank had put his fist through the drywall in the garage after his supervisor was fired, and had patched it himself the next morning, and had apologized to her twice. Vesey listened and made notes and told her there was a way to get out in front of this. Temporary financial protections, he called it, a request that the court restrict Hank's ability to encumber marital assets or make unilateral financial decisions while the divorce was pending. Standard, he said. Protective. It would look aggressive on paper, but paper was paper. Celeste asked if it would hurt him. Vesey said it would protect her. She did not ask the question again. She signed the verification page on a Tuesday afternoon in a conference room with a view of a parking garage, and she told herself the whole way home that it was a formality. She did not understand what she had just put in writing. She would understand it in about 11 days. They came to him at work. That was the part Hank could not get past. Not the words in them, the address on the envelope. A process server walked onto the plant floor at 10:40 in the morning, past the safety board and the shift schedule and the photograph of the crew that had gone 800 days without an incident, and asked the line lead where he could find Hank Schrader. 20 men watched. Hank came around the end of the conveyor, wiping his hands on a rag. He was wearing safety glasses and ear protection around his neck. The server said his name as a question, handed him the envelope, said "You've been served," and left. The floor went back to work. Slowly, Ray Doggett, who ran the second cell and had known Hank for 11 years, came over and stood next to him for a second without saying anything. "You okay, boss?" "Yeah." "You on the office?" "I'll cover." "Yeah." "Thanks, Ray." He read it in his truck in the parking lot with the engine off and the windows fogging. He read it twice. The first time, he understood the words and not the meaning. The second time, he understood the meaning. Celeste, through her attorney, was asking the court for temporary orders. She was asking for exclusive control over certain financial decisions during the pendency of the proceedings. She was asking that Hank be restricted from incurring debt against marital property. And she was building it on a picture of him. The filing said he had exhibited escalating and erratic behavior. It said he had displayed hostility following the disclosure of her separate inherited interests. It described him as emotionally volatile and referenced an incident of property damage in the marital residence. The drywall. She had given them the drywall. And then, in paragraph 14, there was this. Respondent recently applied for and obtained a personal loan in the amount of $6,000 without the knowledge or consent of petitioner, evidencing poor financial judgment and a disregard for the marital estate. Hank read that paragraph 4 times. $6,000. For a roof. Over his daughter's bedroom. Evidence of poor financial judgment. He set the papers on the passenger seat and sat there while the windows went gray with his own breath. He was not furious. That surprised him. He kept waiting for it to arrive, the way you wait for the sound after you see the flash, and it never came. What came instead was something colder and simpler. He was hurt, and under the hurt, something was closing. For 9 years he had defended that woman. He had defended her to Ray, who thought she was distant. He had defended her to his own mother, before she died, who had said once that Celeste seemed like she was always somewhere else. He had defended her to himself 1,000 small times, in 1,000 small moments when it would have been easier not to. And she had taken an argument about a roof, and handed it to a stranger in a suit, and turned it into a weapon with his name on it. Hank started the truck. He did not go back inside. He found Evelyn Rusk through Ray's sister-in-law, who had used her 4 years earlier. Her office was over a shoe repair shop on Union Street, up a flight of stairs that had a rubber tread coming loose on the 4th step. She was about 60, short, square-shouldered, reading glasses on a chain, a coffee ring on the corner of her desk that had been there long enough to become part of the furniture. She had a photograph of a sailboat on the wall and no diplomas at all, which Hank noticed and liked. He put the filing in front of her, along with the folder from the bank and the roofing estimate and the drugstore photographs of the attic. She read for 20 minutes without saying a word. Then she took off her glasses. "How much do you want from her?" "Nothing." Mr. Schrader, nothing that isn't already mine. Evelyn studied him. You understand there's an argument to be made. 9 years. Commingled income. If the trust made distributions into a joint account, did it? I don't know yet. That's why I'd look. Then look, Hank said. And if it did, we'll talk about it. And if it didn't, I don't want $1 of her father's money. Evelyn set the glasses down. All right. Then here's what you're going to do. Okay. Don't retaliate. I won't. I mean it. Not one text. Not one email you'd be embarrassed to see on a screen in a courtroom. I won't. Don't call her names. Not to her, not to your daughter, not to your friends at work, not to a bartender. Assume every word you say about her for the next 6 months is being recorded, because functionally it is. I won't. Don't threaten her. Don't threaten her mother. Don't go near that attorney. I won't. Don't try to get revenge. Evelyn leaned forward. This is the one that gets men in your position. You'll be sitting in your truck at 11 at night, and you'll think of something clever, and it will feel like justice. And it will cost you your case and your daughter's respect in the same afternoon. Hank looked down at the papers on her desk. He thought about the attic, the flashlight beam, the soft wood. I don't need revenge, he said. He paused. I need documentation. Evelyn Rusk sat back in her chair and looked at him for a long moment. Say more. 14 years of pay stubs. Every mortgage statement. Every tax return we filed. Bank records back to the day we opened the account. Every repair I've made on that house. And I've got receipts for most of them, because I keep receipts. He tapped the folder. Every overtime slip from the year my daughter got braces. The plant keeps them. I can pull them. That's a lot of paper. I've got a filing cabinet in my garage, Hank said. It's full. Evelyn smiled for the first time. Mr. Schrader, she said, I think we're going to get along. That night he went home, went to the garage, and turned on the overhead light. The cabinet was gray steel, for drawers, bought used for $30 at an auction. He pulled the bottom drawer open, and the rollers screamed. He worked until 2 in the morning. At some point, he heard the door from the kitchen open behind him. He did not turn around. Hank. He kept sorting. Are you going to talk to me at all? Talk to Evelyn Rusk, he said. That's how this works now. You picked that. The door closed. He put another year in the stack and kept going. The phone call came on a Sunday. He was under the truck when it rang, changing the oil because it was due and because it gave his hand something to do. He slid out, wiped off, and looked at the screen. Lorraine. He almost let it go. Then he thought about Evelyn saying assume every word is being recorded, and he thought, fine, let it be recorded. He answered, Lorraine, you need to leave Celeste alone. No greeting. Her voice was clipped and high and shaking slightly, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed and was already off the script. Hank wiped his hands on the rag and leaned against the fender. I've asked for one thing, he said. What? Honesty. She has nothing to explain to you. Then why did she hide the trust for 9 years? There was a pause. He could hear a television somewhere in her house. Because it isn't yours, Lorraine said. That's why. It was my husband's. He built it. He worked while you were still in high school, and he did not build it so a man who fixes machines could put his name on it. Hank looked up at the garage rafters. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself perfectly. I never asked for $1. Nobody ever asks. They wait, and then they hire someone to ask for them. I offered to sign it away. His voice stayed level. In October, on my own back steps, I told her to bring me a paper and I'd sign it that afternoon. She didn't bring me a paper. She brought me a court filing that says I'm unstable. Another pause. Shorter this time. You're only interested in her money, Lorraine said. Hank closed his eyes for a second. Lorraine, if I wanted her money, I wouldn't have spent 9 years working overtime while she kept the trust secret. Silence. I fixed that roof twice with my own hands, he said. I rebuilt a transmission in February in the driveway. I bought my daughter's braces one paycheck at a time. If I was after $28 million, I want you to explain to me what my plan was. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the worst plan in the history of Ohio. Lorraine's breathing changed. You've become very hard, she said. Yes. That's not the man she married. No, Hank said. It isn't. He hung up. Then he sat down on an overturned bucket in his own garage and stayed there for a while because saying it out loud had cost more than he expected. The rest happened the way those things happen. Not in one blow. In a slow subtraction. Celeste's sister Renata stopped answering his messages. She had called him for help with her furnace. 2 winters running, and he had driven 40 minutes both times and refused the money. Now his texts went blue and stayed there. Her Uncle Bo, who had taught Hank to fish and had once called him the only sane man in the family, sent a message that said only, "I'm staying out of this," which was its own kind of answer. At a hardware store in November, he ran into a woman from Celeste's church group. She saw him at the end of the aisle, and she turned her cart around and went the other way, and Hank stood there, holding a box of drywall screws, and understood that a version of him now existed in this town that he had never met. He did not defend himself. He never once picked up the phone and told his side to a relative. Evelyn had told him not to, and he would have refused anyway. But there was one person he could not protect from it. Brianna came into the kitchen on a Thursday night in late November, and she had been crying, and she was trying very hard not to look like it. "Dad." "Hey, kid. Grandma called me." Hank set down the dish towel. "Okay," she said. Brianna stopped. She was 14. She had her mother's hands and his stubborn chin. She said, "You're trying to take Mom's money, and that's why everything's like this." Hank pulled out a chair and sat down so he was not looking down at her. "Do you want to know what's happening?" "Yes." "Then I'm going to tell you the truth. And the truth is I'm not going to tell you much." Brianna's face crumpled. "That's not fair." "No, it isn't. Everyone else knows. Everyone's talking. Grandma talks to me like I'm on her team. Mom cries in the laundry room and thinks I can't hear." Hank's jaw tightened. "Your mother and I are having serious problems," he said. "Adult problems. Legal problems. And there are things in the middle of them that I could say to you right now that would make you angry at her. So say them." "No." "Why not?" "Because you'd believe me," Hank said. Brianna stopped. "You're 14, and you love me, and you'd believe me, and I'd win. And then in 10 years you'd figure out what I did to you." He shook his head slowly. "I'm not doing that. Not to you." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Nothing. That's the whole answer. You don't have to choose sides. Nobody gets to make you either. Not your grandmother. Not your mother. Not me." He leaned forward. "If anybody in this family tries to put you in the middle, you come tell me, and I will handle it, and I won't be nice about it." Brianna laughed, wet and surprised. "That's the meanest thing you've ever said." "That's the only mean thing I'm going to say." She sat down across from him. After a while she said, quietly, "Are you going to leave?" "I'm going to move out. Eventually." "Will I still see you?" Hank looked at his daughter. "Every week you want to," he said. "For the rest of my life. That's not a thing anyone can take." She nodded and did not say anything else, and they sat there while the kitchen clock ticked. He did not know it then, but that conversation was the most important thing he did in the entire case. Evelyn called him at work on a Tuesday in December. "Can you come by after your shift?" "Something wrong." "Something interesting." He got there at 6:15. It was already dark. The shoe repair shop downstairs was closed, and the stairwell smelled like leather and glue. Evelyn had papers laid out across her desk in 4 rows, held down at the corners by a stapler, a mug, a tape dispenser, and a rock. "Sit." He sat. "Discovery came in," she said. "The trust documents. They fought us on it for 3 weeks, and then the court ordered production, which tells you something all by itself." "Okay. 2 things. The first one is smaller, and I want you to hear it anyway." She slid a photocopy toward him. "This is a financial disclosure your wife signed 11 days before your wedding." Hank looked at it. His own name was on the second page, in a paragraph he had never read. "I don't remember this." "You wouldn't. It's a schedule of separate assets. Standard when there's family money in the background." She listed a savings account, a certificate of deposit, a car, and a quarter interest in a lot in Michigan. "And the trust?" "Not on it." Hank looked up. "At first," Evelyn said, "I assumed it had been legally excluded. Some trusts are structured so a beneficiary genuinely has nothing to disclose at that stage. That's not unusual, and it's not sinister. But then I read the amendment. She pulled a document from the second row. It was 6 pages, dated a little over 8 years before, which put it about 14 months before Whitney Calloway died. Your father-in-law amended the trust while he was sick, Evelyn said. People do that. They get a diagnosis, and they start thinking about what they can't control anymore. She tapped the page. Most of it is housekeeping, trustee succession, a charitable clause, some language about grandchildren. And then there's Section 9. She turned the page around. Hank read it. He read it slowly because the language was dense, and then he read it again because the second time he understood it. Whitney Calloway had written a safeguard into his own trust. If a beneficiary knowingly provided false or materially misleading information to a court, to a tribunal, to a financial institution, for the purpose of obtaining control over the financial affairs of a spouse, a former spouse, or another individual, the trustee had discretion to suspend discretionary distributions to that beneficiary. Not to disinherit them, not to take away what was theirs by right, to close the tap. Hank sat back. He knew, he said. He knew something. We can't know what. Evelyn took off her glasses. In my experience, a man doesn't write a clause like that out of general principle. He writes it because he watched somebody do it, or because he was afraid his daughter might. Evelyn did not answer that. Hank put the page down on the desk. His hand was flat on the paper, and he noticed that it was not quite steady. So, what does this do? Let's be clear about what it doesn't do. Evelyn held up a finger. This doesn't automatically give you her money. Not 1 cent of it comes to you. Ever. Under any reading. I don't want her money. I know. I'm saying it out loud anyway, because in about a month somebody is going to accuse you of wanting it, and I want you to have already said this in front of a witness. Fine. But she sat forward. It could seriously hurt her position. How? Because of what she filed. Evelyn pulled the court papers from the third row and set them next to the trust amendment. 2 documents side by side under the same desk lamp. She went to a court, under oath, and made factual claims about your mental state and your financial judgment in order to get control over your financial decisions. That is precisely the conduct in Section 9. Precisely. If the trustee ever reviews it and concludes she knowingly made false claims about you to obtain that control, he has the discretion to suspend her discretionary distributions. Hank looked at the 2 documents for a long time. Does the trustee know about the filing? Not yet. Are you going to tell him? No. Evelyn shook her head. And neither are you. That's important. If we go running to the trustee, this becomes a man attacking his wife's inheritance. And that's a story anyone can tell against you. We don't touch it. Then how does he find out? The court file is the court file, Evelyn said. Trustees of $28 million instruments have counsel. Counsel reads, and if she loses this motion, there will be findings on the record. The room was quiet. Down on Union Street, a truck went past with a bad muffler. Hank sat with his hands on his knees and felt something he had not expected to feel. It was not triumph. It was the strange, hollow steadiness of a man watching a machine he did not build begin to turn. For 9 years, Celeste had told him he was not to be trusted with the truth. She had decided that in secret, and she had let him live inside her decision, and she had watched him work. And now she had gone 1 step further than the truth could carry her. She had gone to a courtroom and put a lie about him on paper. Not because Hank had attacked her, because she had gone too far, and her own father had seen it coming, and had left a door in the wall for exactly this. Hank, Evelyn was watching him carefully. You've gone quiet. That worries me more than yelling. He looked up. I'm not going to do anything, he said. Good. I'm going to bring you my paper, and I'm going to show up on time, and I'm going to answer every question they ask me honestly, and I'm going to let this happen. Evelyn nodded slowly. That, she said, is the hardest thing I ever ask anybody to do. Hank stood and buttoned his coat. At the door, he stopped. Evelyn. Yeah. If the hearing goes our way, what happens to her? Evelyn considered how to answer. That depends entirely, she said, on what she does in that room. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in January, in Courtroom 3 of the Kessler County Courthouse. It was nothing like television. The room was small and too warm. The radiator under the window knocked twice a minute. There were 9 rows of benches and 4 people in them, 3 of whom were waiting for a different case. The carpet was industrial blue and worn pale in a strip down the center aisle. Nobody shouted. Nobody was arrested. Nobody slammed a folder on a table. Hank wore the same suit he had worn to Whitney Calloway's funeral. He had gotten it let out at the waist by a woman on Main Street for $22. He sat with his hands folded and his back straight, and he did not look at his wife. Celeste sat 11 feet away in a gray coat with her hair pulled back. She had lost weight. Her father's silver watch hung loose on her wrist, and she kept turning it around and around with her thumb. Grant Vesey went first. He was good. Hank would give him that. He spoke smoothly and without notes, and he made everything sound reasonable. He talked about the size of the separate estate. He talked about the responsibility a beneficiary carries toward assets she did not create. He said the word protective 4 times and the word temporary 6. He did not say the word unstable. He let his filing say it for him and stood back from it. The judge was a woman named Rosalind Petrie. She was in her 50s, gray-streaked hair, and she listened the way a mechanic listens to an engine, without expression, waiting for the sound underneath. Then Evelyn stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She put paper in front of the court. 14 years of employment records from Kessler Fabricated Products. A performance file with 3 commendations in it. Not one disciplinary action. Credit history clean. A score in the high 700s. 108 consecutive mortgage payments on time, every one. 9 years of joint tax returns, signed by both parties. Household expense records that Hank had kept in a gray steel cabinet in his garage for over a decade because his father had told him once that a man should be able to prove his own life. Utility payments, insurance, property tax receipts, school fees, registration renewals, and then the receipts. A furnace igniter, $41, replaced by hand in December of the second year. Brake rotors, a water heater element, a dishwasher pump, $230 in roofing materials in one August, and $190 in another August 4 years later. Your Honor, Evelyn said, the petition characterizes my client as financially reckless. I'd like the court to notice what's absent from these records. There is no consumer debt. There are no collections. There are no cash advances, no vehicle repossession, no unpaid accounts of any kind in 14 years. There is a man who fixed his own furnace in December because he did not want to spend the money on a service call. The judge turned a page. And then, Evelyn said, there's the loan. She put the file in front of the court. All of it. The application. The estimate from Ritter Roofing. And 3 photographs printed at a drugstore of rotted decking near a chimney. $6,000, Evelyn said. In his name alone. Disclosed to this court by him, voluntarily, in his first filing. The purpose is not disputed. He did not borrow it for gambling. He did not borrow it for a car he couldn't afford or a vacation or a business idea. He borrowed it to replace a roof over his daughter's bedroom, after his wife told him they could not afford to fix it. The radiator knocked. Judge Petrie set down her pen. Mrs. Schrader. Celeste's head came up. I'd like to ask you a few questions directly. You may consult with your attorney before answering. Vesey started to stand. The judge did not look at him. Did you know your husband was unaware of the trust? The room was very quiet. Celeste's thumb stopped moving on the watch. Yes. For how long? Since her voice failed. She started again. Since before we married. Did you tell him you were financially unable to contribute to the roof repair? Celeste hesitated. It went on a beat too long, and everyone in the room heard the length of it. Yes. Even though you had access to substantial trust distributions? Celeste looked down at the table. Yes. Hank watched the side of her face. He had thought this would feel like something. He had imagined it in his truck at night, more times than he wanted to admit. He had pictured her saying that word in a room with a flag in it. It did not feel like anything at all. It felt like watching a machine that had been running wrong for years finally throw the belt. Judge Petrie turned to the filing. Now, paragraph 7. Your petition asserts that the respondent is emotionally volatile and unable to exercise responsible financial judgment. What is that based on? Celeste opened her mouth. His behavior, she said. Be specific. He was angry. After he found out. He was cold. He stopped speaking to me. Has he ever been diagnosed with a psychiatric condition? No. Has he ever been hospitalized, treated, or evaluated for one? No. Has he ever been arrested, cited, restrained by any order of any court? No. Has he ever failed to manage his own finances, pay his obligations, or maintain employment? Celeste's hands had gone white at the knuckles. No. Your filing references property damage in the marital residence. He put his hand through the wall in the garage. When? In June. Last year. And what happened after that? Celeste closed her eyes. He fixed it, she said. The next morning, Judge Petrie wrote something down. Mrs. Schrader, I want to make sure I understand the whole of what's before me. Your husband learned of a $28 million interest that had been kept from him for 9 years. He asked you about it. He was angry. He asked for a separation, and he applied for a $6,000 loan to fix a roof. Is there anything else, anything at all, supporting the allegation that he is unfit to manage his own financial decisions? The silence went on. No, Your Honor, Celeste said. Vesey put his hand flat on the table, which is what a lawyer does instead of saying something he is not allowed to say. Judge Petrie ruled from the bench. She denied the request for temporary financial restrictions in full. She stated on the record that the petition's characterization of the respondent was not supported by any evidence before the court, and that the sole financial act complained of was a modest, disclosed, secured purpose loan for necessary home repair. Then she did the second thing. The court further orders full financial disclosure by both parties, including all trust instruments, distribution histories, and beneficiary interests within 30 days. This is a divorce proceeding. There will not be a wall in the middle of it. Vesey objected on the grounds of separate property. Counselor, the judge said, separate property remains separate property, but this court will not divide a marital estate while looking at half of it. 30 days. She struck the gavel once, lightly, the way you do when nothing dramatic has happened, and called the next case. Hank stood up. His knees ached from sitting still. In the hallway, Evelyn said quietly, that went further than I expected. How far? She made findings, Evelyn said, on the record, about unsupported allegations. That's not just a loss. That's a document. Behind them, the courtroom doors opened. Hank turned. Celeste came out with her coat over her arm. She looked at him from 20 feet away, and for a second the whole 9 years was in her face. The kitchen, the lemonade, the drive to Indiana with the windows down. She took one step toward him. Hank turned and walked to the stairs. The trustee's name was Averil Danforth, and he had been a friend of Whitney Calloway for 31 years. Hank never met him. He never wrote to him, never called his office, never sent so much as a note through a lawyer. Evelyn had been right about that, and Hank had followed it exactly, and later he would be glad in a way he could not fully explain. What happened was simpler and colder than anything he could have arranged. The mandatory disclosure order required the trust instruments to be produced. The trust counsel produced them, and in doing so, read the file they were being produced into. That file contained a January order from Judge Rosalind Petrie denying a motion and stating that the allegations supporting it were unsupported by the evidence. Counsel flagged it. Counsel sent it to Danforth. Danforth read it twice, the way Hank had read the papers in his truck. Then he opened Section 9. The letter went out in March. Hank saw it months later, in Discovery, on a Tuesday afternoon in Evelyn's office, and he read it standing up. It was 3 pages, and it never raised its voice. It said the trustee had reviewed filings made by the beneficiary in the matter of Schrader versus Schrader. It said those filings contained factual assertions regarding the mental and financial competence of the beneficiary's spouse. It said the court had found those assertions unsupported. It said the trustee had concluded that the beneficiary had provided materially misleading information for the purpose of obtaining control over the financial affairs of her spouse, within the meaning of Section 9 of the amended trust. Discretionary distributions were suspended, effective immediately, subject to annual review. That was all. Celeste was not ruined. Hank wanted that understood. Later, when people in Cedar Ridge told the story wrong. She was not homeless. She was not arrested. Her underlying beneficiary interest remained intact, and the mandatory income stream from the trust corpus continued, because her father had not written a clause to destroy his own daughter. He had written one to stop her hand, but the discretionary distributions were the part she had actually been living on. They were the part that had never appeared on a tax return in a way Hank would have noticed. They were the reason she had never once, in 9 years, seemed worried about anything except being found out. Now the tap was closed. She paid Grant Vesey out of her own pocket. $600 an hour, plus the motion, plus the discovery fight her side had started and lost. Hank never learned the total. Evelyn guessed, and the guess was more than the roof, the truck, and the braces combined. She sold the Range Rover she had bought 2 years earlier and told him was leased through her bookkeeping business. She sold a set of her mother's jewelry that had never been her mother's at all, but had been bought in Chicago on a weekend she had told him was a client conference. And she sold the piano. That one Hank heard about from Brianna, who mentioned it the way kids mention things, sideways, while looking at her phone. A baby grand in the front room, brought in the year Brianna turned 9. Celeste had told him it came from her father's house. It had not. It had cost $21,000, and Hank had eaten leftovers for a month that fall because they were tight. He did not feel good hearing it. That surprised him too. The worst of it, for Celeste, was not the money. It was Lorraine. Because Lorraine Calloway read her husband's trust amendment for the first time in April, in her own kitchen, with her reading glasses on and the same television going in the background that Hank had heard through the phone. And what she understood, sitting there, was that Whitney had written it about their daughter. Not about a hypothetical. About Celeste. He had watched something in her in the last year of his life, and he had gone to a lawyer quietly and built a door in the wall, and he had never told his wife. And Lorraine had picked up the phone in October and pushed her daughter straight through it. She had told Celeste to hire the aggressive one. She had told her that a man who says he does not want money has already decided how to get it. She had told her to go first and go hard. Their relationship never recovered. It did not explode. It just thinned out one unreturned call at a time until the two of them spoke on holidays and nothing else. And the last thing Celeste lost was the story. Because the court file was public, and Cedar Ridge is a small town, and the woman from the church group who had turned her cart around in the hardware store eventually read a summary of it. The version everyone had been told was that Hank Schrader had found out about his wife's inheritance and gone after it. The version in the file was that a man had applied for a $6,000 loan to fix a roof, had never asked for a dollar of the trust, had offered in writing to waive any claim to it, and had been called mentally unfit in a courtroom for his trouble. Renata called him in May. He let it go to voicemail and did not call back. Bo sent a message that said, "I read it. I should have called you. I'm sorry, Hank." Hank typed, "Thanks, Bo." He did not type anything else. He had never tried to take her inheritance. He had only ever asked why she lied. The divorce took 9 months from filing to final. Hank fought for exactly what he was legally entitled to, and not $1 more. There was a moment in June when it would have been easy to take more. Evelyn found that trust distributions had passed through the joint account 4 separate times in the early years, in amounts that could have supported an argument for commingling. She laid it out for him carefully, the way she laid out everything, and then she stopped and waited. "How much?" Hank asked. "Honestly, it's a fight, but it's a real fight. 6 figures, maybe more, and a year longer." Hank thought about it for 1 full minute. Evelyn let him. "No," he said. "You're sure?" "I told her in October I didn't want it. I said it on my own back steps." He shook his head. "If I take it now, then everything her mother said about me was true, and I'd rather be broke than be that." Evelyn wrote 1 word on her pad and underlined it and never showed him what it was. So he took half the equity in the house, half of what was in the joint account, and his own retirement, and that was all. He did not try to punish her financially. He did not ask the court to make her pay his fees, though Evelyn told him he had a strong argument after the January findings. He did not fight for full custody. Brianna was 15 by then and had opinions, and the arrangement they built gave her a bedroom in both houses and a say in her own week. He never said 1 bad word about Celeste to their daughter. Not once. Not on the hard nights, and there were hard nights. He simply refused to forgive her. That was the thing people misunderstood about Hank Schrader. They kept waiting for the part where he softened. They were used to a story where the man rages and then breaks, and then, in the last scene, puts his hand on her shoulder and says something about how life is short. That never came. He was not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier, and he had no use for it. He was simply finished in the completely quiet way that a man is finished when something inside him has been switched off and cannot be switched back on by anybody, including himself. They signed the final decree in a conference room in September. Celeste's hands shook. Hank's did not. When it was done, she said, "Hank," and he said, "Take care of yourself," and walked out, and that was the last time they spoke in a room. He bought a small house 20 minutes outside Cedar Ridge, off Poplar Creek Road. 1 story. 3 bedrooms, one of them small, and painted the color Brianna picked. There was a detached garage with good light and room for the gray steel cabinet. The roof was the first thing he checked. It was 19 years old. He knew what that meant. He called Ritter Roofing in October, 1 year almost to the week from the storm, and the same man came out and walked it and came down with the same clipboard. "Full tear off," he said. "I figured. 7,004. When can you start?" They did it in 3 days. Hank took 2 of them off work and stood in the yard and watched. And on the second afternoon, he climbed up and helped carry bundles because he could not stand there any longer with his hands empty. He paid for it himself. Cash and the last of the loan he had never canceled. The first night it rained, he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and did not turn on the television. No bucket in the hallway. No towel on the floor. No stains spreading in the plaster over his daughter's room. No conversation about what they could and could not afford. Just rain on a roof he had paid for, doing exactly what a roof is supposed to do. His phone buzzed on the table. He turned it over. "Celeste, I know I ruined everything. I wish you could forgive me." Hank looked at the screen for a long time. The rain kept up outside. Somewhere down the road a car went by slow through standing water. He thought about the kitchen, that night, the faucet going off. He thought about a 14-year-old girl crying in a hallway because her grandmother had made her pick a side. He thought about a process server walking across a plant floor in front of 20 men who had trusted him with their safety for over a decade. Then he typed, "I hope you become a better person, but I won't be part of your life anymore." He read it once. He did not soften it. He sent it. Then he deleted the conversation and blocked the number and set the phone face down. He did not block her out of revenge. He had turned down a 6-figure argument in June. He was not interested in revenge and never had been. He blocked her because he was finished. There is a difference, and it took him a year to learn it. Brianna came out to the Poplar Creek house on a Saturday in February. She was 16 now, with a learner's permit and a way of driving that made Hank grip the door handle and pretend he wasn't. She let herself in without knocking, which he liked, and dropped her bag by the door, which he had stopped commenting on. He made grilled cheese because it was what she still asked for, and she sat at the kitchen table with her feet up on the second chair. For a while they talked about nothing. Her chemistry teacher, a car she wanted that he was not going to buy her, a friend who had quit the team. Then she went quiet and turned her glass in a circle on the table, and he knew something was coming. "Dad." "Yeah." "Mom says you hate her." Hank set down the spatula. He came and sat across from her and took his time. "I don't hate your mother." "Then why won't you talk to her?" "Because those aren't opposites." Brianna frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn. Sometimes loving someone doesn't mean you have to keep them in your life. Sometimes it just means you don't wish them harm. That's the whole of what I've got, and I'm not going to pretend it's more than it is. "That's cold." "Maybe." "Grandma says you're cold." "Your grandmother is entitled to her opinion," Hank said. "She's also entitled to the phone number I gave her, and she hasn't used it in 14 months. Brianna looked down. "Mom cries about it." "I know. Doesn't that do anything to you?" Hank thought about how to answer that honestly, because he had promised himself he would never lie to this kid about anything that mattered. "It used to," he said. "For a while it did. Then one day it stopped, and I noticed it had stopped, and that was that." He looked at her. "I'm not proud of it, and I'm not ashamed of it. It's just where I ended up." Brianna was quiet. Then she asked the question she had been carrying for 2 years. "What about the money?" Hank smiled. It was small, and it was real. That was never the important part. Everybody says it was. Everybody's wrong. Then what was? He looked toward the window. Out past the yard, the field went brown and flat toward the tree line, and the sky sat low and gray, and it looked like it might snow before dark. "Trust," he said. Brianna waited. "I trusted your mother with my entire life." He said it plainly. There There was no shake in it. Every hour I worked, every dollar I made, every plan I had, I handed it all to her, and I never once checked the numbers, because I didn't think I had to. He paused. She decided I didn't deserve the truth. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a bird came off the fence line and went across the field. For 9 years, Hank said, she looked at me and decided that again, every single morning. That's the part. Not the money, not the roof, the choosing. Brianna reached across the table and took his hand. Hank looked at it, surprised. His daughter's fingers were long and thin and had his mother's crooked little finger, and there was chipped black polish on 2 of the nails. He squeezed it. "I'm okay, kid," he said. "I know. You don't have to worry about me. I know that too." She squeezed back. "I'm doing it anyway." They sat there a while longer, and then she asked if she could drive to the store, and he said yes and got his coat and gripped the door handle the whole way. Here is what Hank Schrader had lost. A marriage of 9 years. A house with a crack in the driveway. A woman he had loved without any reservation at all, which he now understood was a thing he would probably never manage twice. Her sister, who had called him for help with a furnace and never called again. Her uncle, who had taught him to fish. A whole family that had turned out to be on loan. And here's what he had kept. His daughter, who came out on Saturdays and let herself in without knocking. His work, and the 20 men on that floor who had watched a stranger hand him an envelope and had never once asked him about it afterward, which was its own kind of loyalty. A gray steel filing cabinet that had told the truth about his life when he needed it to. And his own name, exactly as clean as he had kept it. Celeste had spent 9 years protecting $28 million. She had guarded it through vacations they never took and a transmission rebuilt in a February driveway and 11 months of overnight shifts. She had guarded it right up to the moment when guarding it required her to walk into a courtroom and say her husband was not in his right mind. And she had learned what the money had never been able to tell her. It was not what made the marriage valuable. It had never been that. She had sacrificed the one thing money could not buy back, and no distribution, discretionary or otherwise, was ever going to restore it. The trust of the man who loved her. Outside, on the drive back from the store, the first snow started coming down over Poplar Creek Road, and Brianna took the turn too wide, and Hank told her so, and she laughed at him, and he let it go.